All around the world today, there are preachers stepping into pulpits in empty churches, or firing up their Zoom accounts, or hitting play on pre-recorded sermons, each one endeavoring to bring the Easter message, Christ is risen indeed, to their people in this extraordinary time. And I suspect the gist of most of these Easter sermons is that it still feels an awful lot like Good Friday. The church will get to Easter eventually, and it will be a fabulous party when we do. But for now, our long winter continues with no end in sight. Of course, the fact that it doesn't feel like Easter doesn't mean Easter hasn't come. In the spirit of faith, we do our best with flowers plucked from parishioners' gardens and handbells found in the choir closet and a table set with the finest silver, even though no one's coming to dinner. We listen to the narrative from John's Gospel about that very first Easter morning and maybe pay closer attention to the details of that miracle story that propelled Christianity into being, which, as you may have noticed, has far more weeping in it than it does celebration. When the church is full of trumpets and flowers and hundreds of people dressed in spring colors, it's easy to lose sight of the fact that the miracle of Easter begins in the dark. That the bright golden light of new life and new birth is preceded by a time of coldness and loneliness and silence and fear. Easter has this in common with another central story of our faith, which we tell on our other major feast day, Christmas Eve. Like the very first Easter, the very first Christmas also begins in the dark. Both Christmas and Easter miracles start in the uncertainty and shadow of a silent night. Both tell of an encounter between a young woman named Mary and an angel of the Lord, and how these two Marys are then swept up as leading ladies in God's wild and incomprehensible mystery play, and then sent out to bear the good news of the Word made flesh into the world. Mary, the mother of Jesus, bears that word in her body. Mary Magdalene bears that word on her lips as, breathless from running, she preaches the first sermon in the Christian church when she tells the disciples, "I have seen the Lord." Miracles happen, and there are no press conferences or parades, just a flicker, a flutter of hope. On this Easter day, when our ears are attuned to the isolation and loss all around us, we can hear poignant resonances in our gospel narrative for all who are impacted by this present crisis, like the fact that Mary Magdalene is not able to be with Jesus or comfort him when he's dying. And like countless bereaved people in our world today, she cannot give him a proper burial. Utterly bereft, Mary then recognizes with a stab of indescribable joy the reality of her heart's desire. Her Lord is alive, and she reaches out a hand to touch him. But Jesus says to her, "No, do not hold on to me." It's not hard to stand with Mary Magdalene on this Easter day, wondering, what can I hold on to? The 20th century Swiss theologian Karl Barth once said that what brings someone to worship on Easter Day or any day is a single unspoken question. Is it true? Is it true, this talk of a loving and good God, wrote Bart. What the people want to find out and thoroughly understand is it true? But I think the million-dollar question for us right now is not, is it true, but will it matter? Or better yet, what if it matters? We're closer to the miracle of Easter today than many of us have been in our whole lives. And in these two tiny words, what if, beats the fluttering heart of hope. Mary Magdalene had no idea what her encounter with the risen Lord in a garden outside an empty tomb would mean for the whole world. All she knew was the electrifying pulse of hope when Jesus called her name. That was enough. And right now we know, because we are seeing it and feeling it for ourselves, that in this present darkness and suffering there are these flashes, these signs of something new and important and good and holy being born. And if we can hold on to it, maybe we can be changed. And if we can be changed, so can the world. Will it matter? And even more terrifying and thrilling, what if it does? At the end of the Second World War, my Quaker grandfather was working in Europe with the Intergovernmental Committee on Refugees, helping resettle displaced persons and those who had been in the camps. He was in Buchenwald the day after it was opened in 1945. And he never spoke about what he saw there with anyone, not even his wife. Like many men of his generation, he was not particularly expressive or emotional. Years later, my dad bought him a record album called The Sights and Sounds of Paris. And when my grandfather heard the scratchy sounds of the Marseillaise recorded on the day of the liberation of Paris, he broke down and began to sob uncontrollably. He put his head down on the tabletop and wept. It was so out of character for him, and my father never forgot it. And though my grandfather died when I was an infant, if I know him at all, it is through this story my father tells. My grandfather saw true evil and the depths of human anguish. He stood in the empty tomb. And I believe he wept, not out of despair, but in hope. Hope that it would matter. So, let me tell you what happened last Thursday night, right here at Christ's Church. On a cold and windy evening when our sanctuary doors were locked, as they must be right now, 11 of our parishioners devised their own night watch. They committed to staying awake with Christ all the dark hours of his last night on earth. From sunset to sunrise, hour by hour, they took turns sitting on the steps of our church to pray and look through the glass doors at the cross on the altar. They couldn't get any closer than that. They kept vigil anyway, by candlelight, bundled up in sleeping bags, not out of despair, but in hope that it would matter. And you felt it too. I know you have. That flicker, that flutter, that lump right here, the sting in your nose and eyes, an intake of breath when you hear about ordinary folks doing extraordinary things, making extraordinary sacrifices, when you experience harmony and real communion, when you get that rush of joy from the simplest of encounters with plain old kindness and goodness and decency and beauty and love. And maybe you've even said these words out loud to someone. I hope it's different on the other side of this. I hope we can keep being the people we've become, who feed the hungry and call up the lonely and lock eyes with a stranger above a homemade face mask and care about them deeply. I hope we're being changed for good. For us, the miracle of Easter is not the fact that God has done something wild and incomprehensible. The miracle of Easter is that hopeful question, what if, in the end, it really matters? That this light of the world breaking through to people whose eyes have grown so used to the dark. On that first Easter morning, neither Mary nor the disciples had any idea what God was setting in motion through them, just as we cannot have any idea what God is setting in motion right now through us. Easter begins in the dark, as the wood of a living tree becomes a cross to bear a dying God, and is even now being transformed by hope in the promise that no darkness is absolute, no sin beyond redemption, no death so deadly as to thwart God's plan to bring from it new life. This is Easter. We are living it right now. Flutter, that flicker, that glimpse of light. It is God's dream for our broken and beloved world. Imagine if we just keep asking this tearful, hopeful, sorrowful, joyful question, what if? It will become our Alleluia song.